In addition to Sass variables that you declare on your own, you can also use numerous built-in functions. When you're actively working on a project, one of the major selling points of Sass is that you can work more quickly and effectively. For example, sometimes you'll need to smooth out one of your equations, or you'll want to more flexibly experiment with CSS colors. Sass allows for all of this and more, so just to give you a taste, let's run through some of these built-in functions. First up, there are several number functions, which are right here, that you can take advantage of. For individuals that are familiar with programming, functions like round, ceiling, and floor should be already familiar to you. So let's say, for example, that we were calculating a percentage of the site's width, which we've already done here. The numbers that we're plugging into our equations right now work out to be whole values, which is what you want for pixels. But let's go ahead and change the site width to 961 pixels, for example. Now if we go to our terminal and we say sass watch style.sass style.css and hit enter, we'll start watching our Sass file, and we can go to our page and hit refresh. And if we go ahead and inspect our content here, and we'll inspect the content div, you can see right here that the width is no longer a whole value. We're actually getting 700.75 pixels. Now, it won't crash the browser or anything if you have floating point values for your pixels, but for the sake of this example, we should try to be a little bit more exact and make sure that these come out to whole numbers. So let's go ahead and switch back to our code. And to make these come out to whole values, we're going to use the floor function. So right here, we'll just type floor, and we'll type floor again right there. Now, the way that you use functions is by putting the name of the function, which in this case is floor, followed by some parentheses, and then you put something inside of the parentheses. The stuff inside are typically referred to as arguments. This function called floor will round down the result of an expression to the nearest whole number. The complementary function to this is ceil, spelled C-E-I-L, which is short for ceiling. Ceil will round a number up to the nearest whole number instead of rounding down like floor. So when we go back to our page and refresh, and we go ahead and inspect that content element again, you can see that we're now getting a nice whole value of 700 pixels. Great. So let's go ahead and move on, and let's take a look at some of the color functions. So I'm going to switch back to our code here, and color functions are split out into RGB, HSL, and opacity functions. However, you can actually use these functions regardless of what color model you're using, because Sass can do the conversion between HSL and RGB for you. So for example, HSL stands for hue, saturation, and lightness, and you can control these components individually. On our hexadecimal colors, we can adjust the lightness by using the lighten or darken function. If we wanted to experiment with a lighter text color, we could do something like this. So we have our dark color here, which is being applied to our text, and we'll say lighten, and then we'll wrap this in parentheses, and right here we're going to say 50%. Now as you can see, we have a much lighter color when we refresh the page there. Now if we wanted to make our background whites a bit darker, we could do that as well. We just need to switch back to our code here, and where it says white, we'll say darken, we'll wrap this in parentheses, and we'll say we want it to be 30% darker. We'll switch back and refresh, and there you have it. Now we can't see our text at all. Now let's switch back to our code and take a look at this. You'll notice here that I've used a function name with parentheses just like before. However, this time, after my first value here, which is a hexadecimal color value, I've put a comma, and included a second value, which in this case is a percentage. Like I said before, these are called arguments, and the way you separate arguments in Sass is by using commas in between each value. Sometimes arguments are optional, but in the case of lighten and darken, you need these values. If I were to leave the second argument out, for example, like this, and we were to go back and refresh the page, Sass would actually throw an error on the page like you see here, letting us know that we have the wrong number of arguments. Pretty nifty. You can find a whole list of all the functions that are available to you by checking out the Sass documentation, and as you can see, there are quite a few built-in functions. Now, before we wrap things up for Sass variables, there is one more slightly advanced feature that I'd like to point out to you. Let's say that you found yourself using some string of characters over and over again in your property names, such as the word top or left, when creating padding, margin, and borders. By creating a variable like this, you can insert this value of top into the names of CSS properties by using a Sass feature called interpolation. For example, if we wanted to add top margin, top padding, and top border to many elements, we could do something like this. So let's try it out on our paragraphs. We'll say margin, and we want this to be margin top, and that actually needs to be a variable. And we'll say 10 pixels there, and we'll just go ahead and copy and paste that so we can paste it in a little bit easier. We'll say border, and we'll say 1 pixel solid, and we'll make it an orange color. And then we'll say padding 10 pixels and get the idea. Now when we go back and refresh our page, you can see that we have these orange borders and padding and margin at the top of all of our paragraphs. So let's go ahead and switch back to our code so that we can look at this code again. Now, to interpolate a variable name into a property name, you just type a hash sign followed by a set of curly braces, and inside the curly braces you put a $sign and the name of your variable that you want to interpolate. This is pretty nice because if you wanted to instead use another side, such as left, you could just change side here, and when you switch back and refresh, you can see that everything has been moved over to the left. That about wraps it up for variables in Sass. Next, we'll be taking a look at mix-ins, which are another powerful Sass concept.